So really the heart behind it is, hey, let's try to understand how somebody else has followed Jesus in an environment that's going to be very similar to yours, and let's see what we can learn. So for this week, I've asked Jules, and she's going to be, I'm going to ask her some questions. You'll get to know her. I'm not giving her too much of an introduction because I want to give you the opportunity to do that. Well, you don't have to introduce yourself. Your name is Jules. I just did it to everybody. But can you maybe just give us like a brief overview of kind of what your high school experience has been like up till today? Obviously, she's a senior. I guess that maybe should have been obvious because of the title, but she's a senior, so she'll be graduated next month?
Yeah.
Yes.
At the end of May.
At the end of May. Okay. So, yeah, give us a little brief overview of like kind of what your experience in high school has looked like up to this point.
Okay. So, I kind of feel like I have an interesting, unique high school experience. I started out in public school my whole life. I went through elementary school, middle school, and my first year of high school was all through public school. And then COVID hit, so that was just a big part of like our high school experience where we had to deal with just like not having any social interaction, I guess, for quite a long time. And then we went back to hybrid. But in that time during COVID, I ended up transferring to Valley, which is a Valley Christian High School, which is a private Christian high school. So that just changed my whole high school experience where I was just being surrounded by a Christian community and just, yeah.
Yeah. And then when it comes to, obviously, you are at the end of high school, so you're going to be done. Everybody does something different when they graduate high school. Some people go to college, some people get jobs, some people make music on SoundCloud or whatever. For you, you've chosen to go to college. You are going to CBU, Cal Baptist University. Why did you decide to go there? And what did that look like? Like, what did the admission or the application and admission process look like? Was there anything surprising about applying for college or thinking about that you didn't foresee?
So, my dad, he's back there.
Hey, Dad.
He always pushed me to go out of state for college, and I've always loved to travel. I've always intended on going out of state, so I wasn't even looking at California when I first started looking at college. I was looking at places like Texas, and then after Ryan and Grace left, I was looking at Tennessee for a while. And just after going to Valley, I just really learned, like, I value having just being in a Christian community and going to a Christian school. That was just a really big focus for me, so I mainly narrowed it down to out of state, and I narrowed it down to going out of state and private Christian colleges. And then we went to Tennessee, and it just wasn't the kind of community I was looking for. In my opinion, like, it wasn't as Christian as it intended to be, as I wanted it to be. So I don't know, I just started looking at other places, and I wanted to do interior design, so we started looking at private Christian schools with an interior design program, and then that's when we came to CBU. My parents found it online, and I was like, oh, like, CBU, like, Riverside. Yeah, I don't know about that, but as soon as I stepped on campus, it was just, like, this is where I'm going. Yeah. And it was just, God has helped me through every step of the way, going through the process of applications and just having to deal with scholarships. He really blessed me in that way, and we prayed a lot about it, and
That's great, and I think it's important to note, right, like when she's thinking about her future, she's not just going, hey, what do I want to do, but what type of community do I want to be a part of? I think that's super overlooked. I feel like it can be very easy to graduate high school and to just want to run, like whatever it is, whether you want to make money, whether you want to, you just want to go to school so that you get your degree, so that you can get into your career. Like, it's very easy to just think, where do I want to go, what do I want to do? And there's an old proverb that says, when you want to go fast, you go alone. But when you want to go far, you go together. You actually consider, what am I going to be surrounded by? The community, the people, what impact is that going to have on me? It's something to consider. It doesn't mean private Christian school for everybody, but it does mean I'm considering the community that I'm going to be a part of. So when it comes to high school, everybody experiences it differently. Some people thrive, and then they peak. You don't want to peak in high school. Just a piece of advice. But some people, it's like you hate it, and you're like, no, it's just not, like, I'm not thriving. Whether it's grades, academics, social, like, this is not my favorite season. Everyone experiences it differently. For you, I'll say this though, everybody for sure has challenges. What have been some of your challenges and some of the things that you faced, the difficulties that you faced in your high school experience?
So I feel like I've kind of just had quite a bit of challenges throughout high school. Mostly like myself as a challenge. I think when COVID first happened, I got like involved with this guy, and I kind of went behind my parents about it, and I ended up lying. I ended up going behind their backs about it, and that ended up turning into a 9-month-long grounding period.
9 months. Brian
Yeah,
don't play.
so
Yeah.
yeah, he almost went to a year. So I got grounded for about 9 months. That meant no social interaction, and this was during COVID. So it's like I had absolutely no interaction. I was with my parents and family 24/7, which was interesting for sure. But yeah, so that was definitely one of the biggest challenges I had to face, was just dealing with feeling alone all the time and just not having anyone to really go to, especially during COVID when nobody could go outside. And then I think also another huge thing I've had to deal with is just, I think a lot of people might be able to relate to this, but just comparison and just having to deal with social media, and you just see all these people and they look like they have their perfect lives, but obviously it's not like that. And just dealing with having to compare myself to others, like, oh, like, this person's doing so much and I'm just home by myself, like, hanging out with my friends, and just dealing with that, I think. And
Yeah, no. And I mean, like I said, it's going to be different for everyone, right? For some of you, your biggest challenge, like the thing that stresses you out the most, is grades. And maybe that's not even just because, like, you care about grades, but because you know that for you and for your parents, like, that's going to be the make or break whether or not you can do anything, whether or not you can, have the life or have your phone or whatever. Like, it's going to be related to academics. For other times, it's going to be related to your social life. It's going to be related to just the relationship that you have with your parents. It's going to be different for everybody. I think it would be silly of us to think that whatever we're struggling with, we're the only ones who are struggling with. Or we're the only ones who are struggling with it, even though sometimes that's how it feels. You obviously have been following Jesus for a while. How has your relationship with Jesus helped you with some of those challenges that you just mentioned?
Sorry, I'm gonna go back.
Yeah,
really quick.
go ahead.
More on the comparison thing. I've grown up in like a community where everyone's always pushing grades and such, and it's just been like a constant like race to like, I'm comparing myself. I'm like, oh, I didn't get an A on this, so I feel like stupid almost. And it's kind of like that, where I'm constantly comparing my grades to other people, and it's literally like, that's such a huge thing right now, especially with social media around. It's gotten even worse. So yeah, like, it's just been such a struggle I've had to deal with. And even this year, like, my parents know I've always pushed grades upon myself. It's never been my parents. My dad knows, like, he's never pushed grades on me, neither has my mom. And it's honestly just been the community I've surrounded myself with, and just everyone as a whole, that grades are like so important right now. And so I just feel the need, and I end up putting that pressure on myself. And recently, until this year, like, that was something I learned.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and because I think even for some of us, like, you're aware, like, grades equal your future. If you don't get good grades, you're not going to get into the good college, and then you're not going to get the degree, and then you're not going to get the job. And I understand the ripple effect of kind of how some of us can think in that way. So there's a lot that is on the line with whatever it is that we're perceiving as our biggest struggle. For you, in following Jesus, how has your faith helped you navigate all of that?
So I actually listened to this message a couple weeks ago about God holding us up even when we don't see it. He's there by our side, and he's just lifting us up, like walking us as a parent does to their child when they're first walking, which we'll see soon. But so yeah, and just like, even when we think we're doing it all on our own, we're not. It's clearly God's work, that he's working in our lives to hold us up, and just leaning on him for that. And I just think, just trusting in him and like praying about it is just really a big thing.
Yeah, no, and I'm grateful that you said just like praying about it and trying to figure out. You also mentioned again the community, the people that you surround yourself with. When I say trust God, it can sound kind of like ethereal, like it can sound kind of theoretical, where, if you walk out of here and you're like, all right, I'm gonna trust God, you don't always know what to do. Like, okay, well, I still have to do the homework to get the good grade. I still have to, navigate the relationship with my parent that I'm just, it's difficult and it feels like it's tense or whatever it is. So when we say things like trust God, there is a heart posture that we have to learn how to have. But there's also things that we do that actually outwork what that trust looks like. There is, whether it's the practice of prayer or whether it is, I'm going to make sure that the people who are around me are conducive to this trust that I'm trying to cultivate in my own heart. Whatever it looks like, a lot of times when we say trust or when we say have faith, like it can sound kind of like a decision that's like easy to make in here at a church service when the lights are off and the music's playing and it's like, okay, I'm going to trust. But then when we get back into everyday life where it's like, I don't actually know what that looks like for me. We have to figure out, as part of the journey of following Jesus, is, okay, God, what does the next step look like for me when it comes to me trusting you with the challenges, the difficulties that I'm facing in my circumstance. So thanks for saying that. I know that for you, when it comes to your faith and following Jesus, one of the things that's been pretty instrumental, I think I can say that, it's been pretty instrumental, pretty formative, is mission trips. You've gone on a couple trips, which if you're not familiar with the church lingo, we call mission trips that people take where they are on a mission. And they go on a trip. Sometimes it's super local, sometimes it's national, sometimes it's global, where basically a couple of Christians get together and we go, hey, we want to fulfill a purpose that God has. We want to help people in their needs. Sometimes that looks like just straight up street evangelism would be like a term that we would use, where you're just walking up to people and you're telling them about Jesus. Other times it looks like actually meeting their physical needs, helping build shelters for them, helping provide food and resources, whatever that looks like. Mission trips are trips that Christians take where we basically pool our resources, pool our time, our effort, our energy together, and we go, how can we serve people? You've done a couple of those. Tell us about them. What were they like for you? How impactful were they as,
So this past summer, I went to Alaska with my Alaska crew. And recently, I just came back from a mission trip from Zuni, New Mexico, which is this sort of like Indian tribe reservation type thing. And I can say mission trips are absolutely exhausting, but it's one of the most rewarding experiences. And you just see how you're planting a seed, honestly, in other people's lives. And then if you get the chance to go back to those trips, you just see like how those seeds have grown. And that's honestly just our job when we go on mission trips, to just plant that seed and hopefully it grows. And that's not up to us, but that's up to God and their plan. Mission trips, I highly recommend it. It's one of my favorite things that I've gotten to ever do. I think recently when I came back from my Zuni, New Mexico trip, it was just seeing how broken of a world we live in, and just seeing that firsthand. And a lot of people don't get to experience that, but I really would recommend going on a mission trip because you get to see how other people live.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest things that I saw when we went to Zuni was just the lack of love and how much they live in fear, and how just how much the family, like a broken family, impacts someone. And so it's just something I've been grateful for through my experience, through my 9 months of grounding. I've gotten really close with my parents. So it's just leaning on your parents. Your parents are there to help you, but also we have leaders all around here to help. And so you're not alone, and that's something I really would just like to say.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a long list that we can make of the impact that trips like that have on people. One of them, like Jules mentioned, is it definitely does give you perspective. Like, we all, we kind of have our way of looking at the world. We kind of have the experience that we've grown up in. Some of us are growing up, middle class, lower class, like upper, like we have our perspective of like, okay, this is kind of what the world is. This is kind of what people are like. You step out of that. Whether that's just stepping across state lines, whether that's stepping outside of America, outside of North America, and experiencing, here's what other people live like. Believe it or not, like just seeing the lives that other people live on social media or YouTube, that is not sufficient to actually discover, here's what somebody else's worldview is like, here's what somebody else's experience is like. It does reframe a lot. The other thing that it does is, and I really, really believe this, I've heard it said before that if you don't go, you don't grow all the way. And I actually, that's not just contingent upon like trips, but here's what I mean. When it comes to following Jesus, you're going to reach a stage in your discipleship where sitting in church and listening to teachings is not all that you need. Now, I don't think that there's ever a time where you no longer need that, okay? If you just look at the New Testament model of what it means to follow Jesus, disciples regularly got together, listened to teaching, worshiped, all that stuff. Like this is always a thing. But if this is the extent of how you love God and connect with people, this will be insufficient. This will not be enough. There actually reaches a point in your discipleship to Jesus where your next step is no longer just like attending church, but it's actually trying to help somebody else. It's actually trying to make a difference in somebody else's life, putting aside your agenda, putting aside your preferences, putting aside your comfort. That can look a ton of different ways. Mission trips are usually a very conveniently orchestrated way where you get to take that opportunity. So we even have, I don't even know if the Alaska trip is still open. I probably should have checked that. I was looking around to see if anybody could confirm that, but no, it's okay. We have trips that are, they happen on an annual basis, and if that is something that you're interested in, we can totally help you get connected to that. Jules, when it comes to being in high school, you obviously have like the natural struggles that every student is going to struggle with. Like just, you could be a Christian or not. You're going to struggle in high school. You're going to struggle in life, kind of going through different environments. But being a Christian in high school, you're also bound to have difficulties just in your faith. Difficulties remaining faithful to Jesus, difficulties trusting everything that you believe. What has it looked like for you to stay faithful to Jesus when maybe you've had doubts, maybe you've just had rough seasons where it's like difficult to trust the goodness of God in that season? What has it looked like for you to remain faithful in those seasons?
I feel like I can say a couple of things about this. I think in those rough seasons of life, I honestly would say it's really easy to trust Jesus and God because it's like, it's so easy to pray in times of like distress or like when you're going through a rough season and then it just gets better and you're like, okay, and then you forget about God. So I think it's really important to just like remain consistent in your faith. But also, I think in my own struggles, like sometimes I feel almost like a fake Christian. I haven't really said that, but just feeling like I'm not a leader in my own way, kind of, and just being like a new 7th grade co-leader with Katie. Mm-hmm. I just feel almost like I don't know how to lead these girls. Like, I don't read my Bible enough for this, and it's like, even right now, like, I'm up here speaking, I don't know what to tell you guys. Like, this has just been my own experience, so almost feeling like that. And I've never had any sort of huge testimony or anything, so just feeling like I've grown up in the Christian church, I've grown up in a Christian home, and with that influence, so when has that changed from my parents' faith or my family's faith turned to my own faith kind of thing. And even just like in our own world right now, I feel like Christianity specifically is something that's so pushed back on, and like a lot of people hate talking about it, and it's just been like, well, we're Christians too, like we have like a right to like be a Christian. And so even like my friends at public school, they struggle as Christians, like they're not allowed to speak about it, you know? And so I think that's just one of the biggest struggles, but just reminding yourself, like, we're not alone, he's there, and just leaning on him for that and going to him for comfort. Like, he is stronger than any other power that's out there, and like, he is there to get us through it.
Yeah, there was a lot that you said there. The first thing that I just want to highlight has to do with, I just want to say thank you, by the way, for just being so vulnerable and so transparent. When you say something like, like, I don't even know, like, being up here, like, I don't know if I feel, like, good enough, or whatever, whatever the language is that you would use, I think that it is so easy for us to categorize, or not kind of, it's so easy for us to think of following Jesus as, like, there's a finish line. Like, okay, once I hit that part or that point in my journey, I'm like really a Christian. Some of you have raised your hand when we've done like altar call prayers. Like, you've done it multiple times because you have felt like, okay, well, if I sin, or if I do the thing that I know I'm not supposed to do, it's almost like I'm restarting, like I'm starting over with God. And I just don't know how he feels about me. I don't know if he still loves me or whatever it is. Following Jesus, it is a journey. Following Jesus, there are times where you're like, you know what, God, like this is what I have. This is where I'm at. Following Jesus, there are times where you're going to feel like, like life is great, but there's also other times where you're like, I feel like I am not doing as good of a job as I should be doing. And you also made a really important distinction. A lot of times we can talk as if it's like really difficult to believe that God is good when life is bad, right? Because for some of us, that's real. Like, God didn't answer a prayer the way that you wanted him to answer it, and you like are still upset about that. And you feel like, well, if he's real, if he's there, why didn't he show up the way that I wanted to? That's for some of us, that's real. For others of us, the reason we're not that close to Jesus isn't because life is bad. We're not that close to Jesus because life is good. Like, I'm doing okay. Like, I am successful by my metrics. I have friends. I like my life. So one of the reasons that I don't make time to read my Bible or I don't pray is just because I'm doing good enough on my own. And that's why it's so unfortunate when it's like, I don't know about you guys, but you hear the same story over and over again of people's conversion, where it's like, oh, it wasn't until my life fell apart, and then I lost everything. And then, I was really alone, and I didn't have any friends, and that's when then I met God, and I felt his presence, or I experienced him. Like, man, I just wonder, for those of us who are growing up in Christian homes, for those of us who are growing up, and we're like kind of already oriented towards following Jesus, what if that doesn't have to be our story? What if our story doesn't have to be like, oh, life was horrible and then I met God, but it was, no, you know what? I just recognized there's nowhere else for me to go. This is as good as it gets. And I leaned into the process of following him, which at times is like, it's great. At times, it's really easy to pray when we need things from God. But then at other times, it's like, no, I'm choosing faithfulness in this season, which we've seen you do. And one other thing, when it comes to even people who are sharing, people who are leading, I just said a moment ago, like, you're not gonna grow all the way if you don't go. God is probably calling more of you to step out in faith, even if you don't think like you're ready, or even if you don't think like you're Christian enough, or even if you don't think you're disciplined enough. That transition actually happens very early in your discipleship to Jesus. You're always growing, but you're also always giving. So, Jules, you have, kind of knowing what you know now, because obviously it's always easier. I feel like for so many, I talk to so many students, especially their senior year or even their junior year, and they're like, wow, like I'm almost done. Like high school's almost over. When you're in it, it feels like an eternity, and it feels like, man, like this is just life, and I'm not going anywhere anytime soon, whether I like it or not. But then you get to the end, and it happens like that. It is over, and you live a totally different life after high school. It changes. Knowing what you know now, as you kind of come to the end of this season of life, where you are sitting in a classroom for 6 hours a day, because even in college, like you can make your you don't even have to go to class in college. Don't tell Brian I said that, but sometimes you can just read the readings. Anyways, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to someone who is entering high school? For some of us, you're like in 7th grade, so you're like, this feels like I'm going to be here for a while. Nonetheless, what advice would you give to somebody who is entering high school or who is still in, and maybe even is struggling with some of the same things that you have struggled with over the years?
I feel like I have a lot to say about this one. I think the biggest one is boundaries in any relationship you have with anyone. I feel like I have a kind of a big problem of trusting people really easily. So I kind of just like say whatever I say to this person, and then it's just like, oh, like now we're not friends. What are they going to do with that information? And I think just learning to set those boundaries, even it's just like how much I want to hang out with this person. And you spoke on this kind of like a couple months ago about like your crowd, your community, your core in Christ. And I feel like recently I've just had to move a lot of people from my core to my crowd just because I am setting those boundaries, and just learning to remain strong in those boundaries and like sticking to those is really important, because it's not just like boundaries are a good thing. Like it's not there to prevent you from it. Well, it is, but not there to like hurt you. It's there for a good reason, and that's why God, like even in the Bible, he has boundaries set for us, and following those is just leads to like such a more rewarding life experience, I guess. And then my dad has always told me to think for myself, like, and that's one of the most important things I think anyone can learn, is to like think for yourself and not let anybody like control you, and don't let what other people think about you control you. And that's something I still struggle with, and I'm still going through like the whole comparison thing. It's like I'm letting other people control me still, but it's learning that once you get past that, then it's like you're going for life. Like you're good. And so yeah, and this is kind of random, sorry.
Go ahead.
But recently, at the beginning of this semester, one of my teachers had given us a paper, and she said, every Wednesday we're going to write some prayers down, or you're just going to write a prayer down and just read that same prayer over and over again. For every Wednesday we see her, and it's just like persistent prayer, and that's one thing that I've really come to appreciate, because especially having it written down on paper, you look back, and every prayer I wrote maybe like 7 or 8 prayers down, and every single one of those prayers has been answered. And it's just amazing to see, like I was telling my dad yesterday, like one of my prayers I wrote down was about college and scholarships, and I felt like a financial burden to my dad. And I was praying like to be less of a financial burden on that part, but just seeing like, wow, I actually got those scholarships, and like being able to get through that and just continuing to pray about it just really was great.
Yeah, no, those are great. I think when it comes to boundaries, like she said, depending on how you're wired and depending on how much you feel like you want a close friend will kind of dictate sometimes like how fast you're willing to trust someone. And if you're in a season or in a space where you're like, man, like I really, really, really want a friend, you might be super fast to let somebody in on information that it probably wouldn't be wise to just do that, because you have to learn over time, who can I actually trust? I think even when it comes to like writing down prayers and going back to them, I think that's great. I encourage a lot of young people to journal, because I think number one, it helps you just like process emotions. But the other reason is for that reason, to look back on the faithfulness of God. I guarantee you, if you have grown up praying, you've probably seen God answer more prayers than you can recount off the top of your head. But so often what happens is the thing that you were obsessed about 6 months ago, and you were like, please just help, like do something, you're not even thinking about it anymore today. And you don't realize that God, in his own way, in his own time, and he ended up growing you, he ended up intervening in the situation. But a lot of times we're just like, God, help, 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 help. Oh, and then he does, and then we move on. And then we just, we keep on going about our lives. So I really, really like the writing down the prayers piece. And I would also I'd say that's a form of journaling. You can journal your prayers. It's a great way to talk to God. It's a great way to look back over time and see his faithfulness. But thank you for participating in this. Can we clap for her?